In March of 1944, a P-47 Thunderbolt pilot, a member of the distinguished 56th Fighter Group, found himself on a return leg from escorting a formidable bomber formation deep into German territory. The mission now shifted to seeking out opportunistic targets on the journey home. Below, a vast Luftwaffe airfield sprawled across the verdant countryside, an enticing sight with rows of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, arrayed like vulnerable prey. As the flight leader initiated the assault, the pilot instinctively rolled into a dive, aligning his aircraft with the runway from the east, adhering to the customary trajectory that had been drilled into him through countless training exercises back in England. Suddenly, the tranquil sky was shattered by a cacophony of explosions and the fiery tendrils of tracer rounds arcing upwards from every corner of the airfield. The anti-aircraft fire, or flak, was so incredibly dense that it appeared to form an almost impenetrable wall of lead. In a horrifying instant, the pilot's wingman suffered a catastrophic impact to his engine, peeling away from the formation with a thick plume of black smoke trailing behind him. Committed now, screaming earthwards at 300 miles per hour, the pilot realized with chilling certainty that every gun emplacement on that field had anticipated their exact approach. They had been patiently waiting. He managed to strafe the parked enemy aircraft, observing his rounds sparking off the fuselage of a Bf-109. Yet his own Thunderbolt was simultaneously absorbing a relentless barrage of hits. The sturdy fighter shuddered violently as 20mm shells perforated its wing. Instinctively, he wrenched the controls, pulling up hard, his adrenaline temporarily masking the extent of the damage, and somehow, against all odds, nursed his heavily shot-up machine back across the English Channel. This harrowing experience was far from an isolated catastrophe. It represented the grim norm for American fighter pilots throughout the latter part of 1943 and the early months of 1944. Strafing missions, which involved attacking enemy aircraft on the ground, had devolved into perilous endeavors, characterized by staggering attrition rates that even seasoned bomber crews found alarming. The fundamental issue was not a deficiency in courage or a lack of pilot skill. Instead, the inherent flaw lay in the predictable nature of their attack patterns. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Every airfield situated within occupied Europe had been strategically oriented with the dominant westerly air currents in mind. Consequently, aircraft habitually took off and landed heading east directly into the wind. It was therefore an intuitive flight path for American pilots to also launch their attacks from the east, leveraging this logical approach to secure the longest possible strafing run down the runway. However, the Luftwaffe was far from naive. German anti-aircraft crews, astute observers of these patterns, had positioned their guns precisely where they would inflict maximum damage, concentrating their formidable firepower on the eastern approaches. Each 20mm quad mount, every 3.7 cm flak gun, and every machine gun nest was sighted in on this readily foreseeable avenue of attack. When American fighters came screaming in from the east, they were effectively flying into a pre-registered kill zone, a lethal gauntlet where German gunners had already meticulously calculated range, deflection, and firing solutions. It was akin to running into a meat grinder that had been specifically designed to chew up American fighters, and the grim statistics of loss rates told this brutal story with chilling clarity. during the strafing attacks conducted in January and February of 1944. 8th Fighter Command was experiencing astronomical attrition, losing aircraft at nearly 4 times the rate encountered during air-to-air combat. Pilots who had successfully navigated months of intense aerial duels against the Luftwaffe's finest were now being shot down by anonymous ground fire from gunners who never even saw their faces. It became imperative that something change, and change quickly, as the imminent invasion of Europe loomed, demanding that the Allies achieve absolute aerial dominance, not merely in the skies, but critically on the ground as well. The Luftwaffe had, over many years, meticulously refined airfield defense into a veritable science. This was no haphazard deployment of a few machine guns scattered around a perimeter. German engineers had, in fact, transformed every operational airfield across occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands into impregnable bastions, where interlocking arcs of fire created zones that were virtually impossible to penetrate without incurring catastrophic damage. A comprehensive survey of a typical Luftwaffe airfield in early 1944 would reveal a multitude of formidable anti-aircraft emplacements, ranging from 40 to 80 positions. The Germans effectively implemented a defense-in-depth strategic principle, a concept borrowed directly from their terrestrial combat doctrine. The peripheral cordon, positioned approximately 800 to 1,000 meters from the runway, prominently featured light 20mm flak 38 guns, the very same weapons that had so effectively chewed up RAF bombers during the Battle of Britain. These guns boasted a formidable rate of fire, discharging 120 rounds per minute, and were specifically arrayed to engage attacking aircraft during their initial approach run, long before they could successfully line up for their strafing pass. Closer in, at distances ranging from 400 to 600 meters, lay the intermediate layer, 37 and 40mm guns, which delivered heavier shells, often equipped with proximity fuses. These were the true killers. A single 37mm round possessed the destructive power to tear the wing clean off a P-47 Thunderbolt or snap the tail section entirely from a P-51 Mustang. German crews underwent constant, rigorous training in tracking rapidly moving targets, and their proficiency was unsettling. Survivors from strafing runs recounted seeing these medium guns tracking them with terrifying precision, their barrels swiveling with unsettling accuracy to follow their flight path as they dove in. The innermost ring, however, was perhaps the culmination of the defensive scheme and arguably the most dangerous of all. Quad-mounted 20mm guns, strategically positioned directly alongside the runway approaches, possessed the capability to pump out nearly 500 rounds per minute per mount. At distances under 300 meters, these weapons did not necessitate exceptional accuracy. Their purpose was simply to hose the sky with such a prodigious volume of fire that anything flying through their designated fire cone was statistically doomed. German gunners aptly termed this devastating saturation of airspace the Feuerwand, or firewall. Yet, the true ingenuity of the Luftwaffe's defensive system transcended the mere presence of the guns themselves. It resided in their strategic positioning, which was deeply informed by operational reality. German airfield commanders possessed an intimate understanding that their own aircraft took off and landed heading east into the prevailing westerly winds. They correctly surmised that attacking fighters would follow this identical approach vector to maximize their time on target. Consequently, they concentrated their formidable firepower on the eastern approaches, constructing what amounted to an impenetrable barrier. Every single gun position had pre-calculated firing solutions meticulously charted for targets approaching from specific compass headings. Gunners were therefore not compelled to guess. They had fired practice rounds at those exact angles hundreds of times, ensuring their readiness. The Germans even employed a deceptive stratagem, positioning dummy aircraft on the western side of airfields as bait. These were typically shot-up wrecks or wooden mock-ups, skillfully painted to resemble operational fighters. The underlying logic was elegantly simple. If an American pilot somehow came in from the west, he would expend valuable ordnance on worthless targets while flying through comparatively lighter defenses, only to then be forced to execute an evasive maneuver and run directly into the concentrated eastern flak belt during his escape. Intercepted directives from captured Luftwaffe personnel subsequently revealed that German airfield defense crews had received exacting instructions: engage targets at maximum range from the east, force them to fly through multiple fire zones, and maintain concentrated fire even after the attacking aircraft had passed overhead, specifically to inflict damage during their egress. The manual utilized by German anti-aircraft units explicitly noted that enemy fighter bombers will approach from the landing direction, and positioned forces accordingly. American pilots were not merely confronting guns. They were facing a sophisticated defensive philosophy that had correctly foreseen and countered their every anticipated move. Colonel Hubert Zemke was not the kind of officer who accepted casualties as an inevitable price of doing business. As the esteemed leader of the 56th Fighter Group, famously known as the legendary Wolf Pack, he had forged a formidable reputation for aggressive tactics coupled with an analytical rigor that was notably unconventional among fighter pilots of his era. While many other group commanders focused almost exclusively on individual bravery and superior flying skill, Zemke approached air combat like a methodical engineer intent on solving a complex problem. And in early 1944, he confronted an intractable predicament that was claiming the lives of his pilots at an utterly unacceptable rate. Zemke initiated a meticulous compilation of intelligence. Following every strafing mission, he personally conducted exhaustive post-mission briefings with surviving pilots, forensically charting precisely where their aircraft had sustained damage, identifying which gun positions had initially engaged them, and determining their exact approach vectors. He also requested comprehensive aerial reconnaissance imagery of Luftwaffe airfields, and dedicated countless hours to studying these photographs with his intelligence officer, marking every visible flak position with a grease pencil. What emerged from this painstaking analysis was a stark revelation, a pattern so glaringly obvious it seemed incredible that no one had acted upon it previously. The Luftwaffe had systematically constructed their defenses for attacks originating from the east unequivocally. The western approaches, in stark contrast, possessed perhaps one-third the gun emplacements, and those that did exist were primarily positioned to engage aircraft climbing out after an attack run, not aircraft inbound for a fresh assault. More importantly, the heavy 37mm and 40mm guns, responsible for the most devastating damage, were all sighted in with pre-calculated firing solutions specifically configured for eastward engagements. Zemke grasped a profound insight. Those anti-aircraft guns could not easily traverse rapidly enough to engage targets approaching from unexpected angles. Anti-aircraft weapons in 1944 were not point-and-shoot devices. Engaging a fighter jet traveling at 300 mph demanded that the gun crew execute complex ballistics calculations involving lead, elevation, and deflection. The Germans had performed all that intricate mathematical work in advance for eastward approaches. Time twos. However, a target coming from the west, attacking in the opposite direction of normal landing patterns, would necessitate gunners to completely reverse their firing solutions within the mere handful of seconds, separating visual acquisition from weapons range. It was the fundamental distinction between aiming at a target one had practiced hitting 1,000 times and attempting to shoot at something rapidly approaching from an entirely unanticipated direction. Consequently, Zemke put forth a revolutionary proposition: attack Luftwaffe airfields from the west, deliberately going against the normal traffic pattern, strafing in the opposite direction of customary takeoffs and landings. His staff initially dismissed the idea as preposterous. The entrenched belief, or conventional wisdom, dictated that one attacked along the runway axis to maximize optimal engagement duration, and runways were invariably oriented east-west due to prevailing winds. Attacking from the west, they argued, would mean strafing across the runway instead of down its length, thereby affording less time to engage parked aircraft. But Zemke had done the pragmatic assessment. If attacking from the west meant his pilots absorbed 70% less flak damage, they could readily afford a slightly reduced time on target. Dead pilots could not destroy aircraft. Live pilots who survived their initial pass, however, could return for a second. The kill-to-loss ratio, he reasoned, would improve dramatically, even if individual pass effectiveness decreased marginally. He was not interested in theoretical perfect attacks. He was ultimately interested in attacks his men would survive. The commander, Colonel Hubert Zemke, harbored deep concerns regarding the safety of his airmen. He devised a novel tactical approach which he christened reverse pattern strafing. This innovative strategy involved American fighter aircraft executing a low-altitude approach from the west, defying the conventional approach vectors that German air defenses had meticulously optimized. The element of surprise was paramount, allowing the American pilots to strike parked enemy aircraft before the anti-aircraft artillery crews could mount an effective response. Following their devastating assault, the fighters would then execute an eastward egress, ascending through what had traditionally served as the approach corridor. By the time German gunners managed to reposition their heavy weaponry and traverse it to engage the departing aircraft, the American fighters would already be accelerating away at treetop level, an altitude too low for the flak guns to depress sufficiently and track them accurately. Zemke recognized the imperative of validating this strategy through a live combat scenario against a heavily fortified target. On May 8, 1944, the designated objective was Oschersleben, a Luftwaffe airfield situated approximately 80 miles west of Berlin. Intelligence reports indicated that this facility housed elements of Jagdgeschwader 11, one of the Luftwaffe's elite fighter units. Prior conventional eastward approaches to this airfield had resulted in significant losses for 8th Fighter Command, with 11 fighters downed, while only approximately twice that number of German aircraft were destroyed on the ground. This unfavorable exchange rate necessitated a change in tactics. Zemke's 56th Fighter Group was tasked with implementing this new, unconventional approach. The mission briefing that morning diverged significantly from established protocols. Zemke's operations officer meticulously outlined the attack plan. A formation of 16 P-47 Thunderbolts would approach Oschersleben from the west, maintaining minimum altitude and utilizing terrain features for concealment to evade early radar detection. Their emergence would occur a mere 2 miles from the airfield, granting German defenders scant time to react. The fighters would then strafe westward across the parking revetments and dispersal areas before initiating their eastward egress. Pilots who had previously engaged Oschersleben expressed skepticism, their training emphasizing an attack trajectory down the runway, not across it. However, Zemke had carefully selected his flight leaders, individuals who placed immense trust in his judgment and possessed the ability to adapt tactics spontaneously. Captain Walker Mahurin, an accomplished ace with 16 confirmed kills, was assigned to lead the first flight. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, renowned for having nursed a severely damaged Thunderbolt back from a mission after sustaining over 200 hits, would command the second. These were not inexperienced pilots prone to panic under duress. Rather, they were seasoned combat veterans capable of improvisation. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please also leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The attack unfolded precisely as Zemke had envisioned. The Thunderbolts roared in at an astonishing 50 feet above the ground, screaming over Oscherslaben's western perimeter before German radar could even register their presence. The Luftwaffe pilots on the field were the first to spot them. Men engaged in pre-flight checks or walking towards their aircraft frantically dove for the safety of slit trenches. As 8 tons of fighter aircraft thundered overhead at speeds exceeding 300 km/h. The anti-aircraft guns positioned on the western side of the airfield opened fire, but they were few in number, and their crews were desperately attempting to track targets that had already flown past their firing positions. Mahurin's flight converged on the primary dispersal area, where FW-190s were arrayed wingtip to wingtip. His quartet of 50-caliber machine guns in each wing discharged a continuous stream of fire, tearing through 3 enemy fighters before he even needed to adjust his aim. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds penetrated aluminum skins, fuel tanks, and engine blocks with devastating efficiency. 2 of the Focke-Wulfs erupted in immediate explosions, while the third simply buckled and collapsed as its internal structure disintegrated. Johnson's flight concentrated its efforts on the northern revetments, where Bf-109s were ensconced within sandbag protective positions. The reverse approach proved particularly effective, as it allowed them to strike these positions from the rear quarter, precisely where the Germans had neglected to reinforce them. The sandbag walls, designed to offer protection against frontal assaults, proved utterly ineffectual against fire originating from behind. Johnson personally accounted for the destruction of 4 Messerschmitts in a single rapid 5-second burst. The German flak crews descended into disarray. The heavy 37mm guns on the eastern side were oriented to engage aircraft approaching them, not those already overhead and rapidly departing. By the time the gunners managed to traverse their weapons, the Thunderbolts were already executing their eastward egress at maximum speed and minimum altitude. A few sporadic bursts of light anti-aircraft fire pursued them, But the concentrated, overwhelming barrages that had characterized previous attacks simply failed to materialize. The defensive firewall, it turned out, harbored a critical vulnerability, and Zemke's skilled pilots had exploited it with surgical precision. The results sent shock waves through 8th Fighter Command. The 56th Fighter Group had obliterated 23 German aircraft on the ground at Oschersleben, a tally more than double the typical haul from preceding raids. Crucially, all 16 attacking Thunderbolts safely returned to base. A handful sustained minor flak damage, but nothing of serious consequence. 0 losses. For a strafing mission against a heavily defended target, such an outcome was unprecedented. The resounding triumph at Oschersleben transcended mere surprise. Zemke and his intelligence staff recognized that they had exposed a fundamental flaw in Luftwaffe airfield defense that defied easy rectification. The problem was deeply rooted in the immutable principles of physics, engineering constraints, and the operational realities governing the functionality of airfields. To fully grasp the devastating efficacy of reverse pattern attacks necessitates a detailed examination of the critical 15-second interval when American fighters burst onto the horizon. German flak guns were not autonomous systems. Each weapon required a coordinated crew of 4 to 6 individuals. This team typically comprised a commander issuing target bearings, loaders supplying ammunition, gunners traversing the weapon and adjusting its elevation, and spotters tracking the target's trajectory. The heavy 37 and 40 millimeter guns, responsible for inflicting the most damage on attacking aircraft, possessed traverse rates of approximately 20 to 30 degrees per second. While sufficient for tracking a target moving across their field of view at a predictable angle, this rate proved inadequate for a complete rotation when a target emerged from the diametrically opposite direction. In scenarios where American fighters attacked from the east, German gun crews had a window of 12 to 18 seconds from visual acquisition to the aircraft entering weapons range. The guns were already oriented in the general direction of the anticipated threat. Gunners made minor, precise adjustments. Loaders had ammunition at the ready. Commanders had pre-calculated firing solutions committed to memory. It was akin to a baseball player poised at the plate, anticipating a pitch whose trajectory was already known. All preparatory steps were complete, and execution was simply a matter of precise timing. Reverse pattern attacks fundamentally altered this equation. Fighters approaching from the west necessitated that gun crews physically rotate their weapons approximately 180 degrees, a half-circle traverse that consumed between 6 and 9 seconds for the heavy flak guns. However, the American fighters were only 12 seconds away from being directly overhead. By the time German gunners managed to orient their weapons correctly, the P-47s were already engaged in strafing parked aircraft and commencing their egress. The window for effective engagement dramatically shrank from approximately 15 seconds to perhaps a mere 3 or 4 seconds of viable firing time. Adding to the defenders' predicament, the egress route took American fighters directly through what had traditionally been the approach corridor, the eastern sector, where heavy guns were strategically positioned. Yet these fighters were now moving away at high velocity and extremely low altitude. Flak guns are inherently limited in their depression capabilities. They cannot aim straight down. Most heavy German anti-aircraft weapons were incapable of depressing below -3 degrees, which meant that once an aircraft descended below a certain altitude relative to the gun position, it became physically impossible to hit it. American pilots, expertly exploiting reverse pattern attacks, egressed at altitudes of 50 to 100 feet off the ground, effectively placing them below the depression limits of the most dangerous anti-aircraft weapons. The intricate mathematics of deflection shooting further exacerbated the challenges for German gunners. When a target is moving across one's field of view, the aim must be directed ahead of it, leading the target so that the shells and the aircraft converge at the same point in space. The precise amount of lead required is contingent upon the target's speed and angle. German gunners had undergone extensive, exhaustive training to master these calculations for eastward approaching targets. However, when fighters attacked from the west, all these calculations were inverted. A gunner who had spent months training to lead targets moving from left to right suddenly had to mentally recalculate for right-to-left movement under the intense pressure of combat, with only seconds to execute. Deeply ingrained muscle memory in this scenario became a significant liability. Gunners instinctively led targets in the incorrect direction, sending shells trailing behind the American fighters instead of accurately impacting in front of them. Captured German documents from June 1944 unequivocally revealed the magnitude of the problem. Luftwaffe airfield defense units reported considerable difficulties in engaging enemy fighters that attacked from non-standard vectors and formally requested the repositioning of heavy flak batteries. However, this is where operational realities created an insurmountable dilemma. The guns could not simply be moved. Their existing positions had been meticulously selected based on years of defensive doctrine, intricately linked to established communications networks, supplied by ammunition dumps strategically placed for specific sectors, and fully integrated into the overall airfield layout. Relocating them would necessitate weeks of intensive engineering work, and such a luxury of time was simply not available. The window of opportunity for tactical adjustments was exceedingly narrow, with no protracted periods available for leisurely deliberation. News of Colonel Zemke's groundbreaking achievements disseminated rapidly throughout the 8th Fighter Command, propagating with the intensity of an uncontrolled conflagration. Squadron leaders, who had previously witnessed their aviators suffering grievous losses during conventional strafing sorties, were suddenly presented with an effective and viable tactical methodology. As May 1944 drew to a close, merely a few weeks prior to the momentous D-Day landings, the revolutionary reverse pattern concept was being formally presented and discussed at both wing and higher command echelons. Major General William Kepner, the esteemed commander of the 8th Fighter Command, astutely perceived this innovation as a potent force multiplier capable of fundamentally transforming the aerial supremacy struggle over the European theater, then under enemy occupation. Its official endorsement transpired with unprecedented swiftness, eclipsing nearly every other tactical advancement in military annals. Specifically, on May 22, 1944, the 8th Fighter Command promulgated Tactical Directive 244, a pivotal order that unequivocally sanctioned reverse pattern strafing engagements against Luftwaffe airfields. Furthermore, it strongly advocated that group commanders integrate this novel technique into their established standard operating procedures. While the directive did not enforce its exclusive application, acknowledging that traditional assault methods still retained their utility based on the specific target's layout and its defensive posture, it nevertheless bestowed official legitimacy upon what had originated as Zemke's audacious experimental maneuver. Merely 14 days prior, a palpable acceleration in training regimens swept through the 30 formidable fighter groups strategically positioned across England. Aviators, who for countless months had meticulously honed their strafing proficiencies using a singular, conventional trajectory, were now compelled to completely reconfigure their entire operational methodology. Simulated missions conducted over the Royal Air Force's designated training aerodromes unequivocally demonstrated that while the initial learning curve presented a significant challenge, it remained ultimately surmountable. The most formidable obstacle encountered was not the inherent complexities of aerial navigation or weapon deployment. Rather, it lay in compelling pilots to overcome their ingrained impulse to initiate attacks along the primary runway axis. Veteran airmen, whose instincts had been forged over numerous engagements, persistently gravitated towards aligning themselves with the longest dimension of the targeted airfield. Consequently, squadron commanders found themselves repeatedly emphasizing with unwavering conviction that the paramount importance of survival unequivocally superseded adherence to conventional, textbook-derived geometric attack patterns. After 2 or 3 paragraphs, ask us to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The tangible outcomes of this strategic shift manifested themselves with striking immediacy. During the critical period, spanning May 21st to June 5, 1944, precisely the fortnight preceding the monumental Normandy invasion, the 8th Fighter Command executed a total of 63 intensive strafing sorties, targeting Luftwaffe airfields situated across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. A substantial majority, specifically 47, of these engagements judiciously incorporated the newly implemented reverse pattern attack methodology. A dramatic and encouraging reduction in the loss rate was observed. It plummeted from a concerning 8.3% per mission when employing traditional approaches to a remarkably lower 2.1% when utilizing the innovative reverse pattern tactics. Even more significantly, the efficacy of these attacks was underscored by the near doubling of the destruction rate of German aircraft while they were still grounded. This figure surged from a previous average of 1.4 aircraft obliterated per attacking fighter to an impressive 2.6 aircraft destroyed per attacking fighter. The compelling numerical evidence was irrefutable, leaving no room for doubt regarding the superior effectiveness of the new strategy. For each American fighter aircraft regrettably expended in combat, the Luftwaffe was suffering a disproportionately greater loss of its own aircraft, obliterated on the ground, compared to the grim statistics of preceding months. A particularly notable instance involved Major Thomas Hayes of the distinguished 357th Fighter Group, who, on June 3rd, achieved the remarkable feat of annihilating 6 Bf-109s in a solitary reverse pattern pass during an assault on Juvincourt Airfield. Demonstrating exceptional prowess, he then executed a swift turnaround for a subsequent pass, which successfully accounted for an additional 3 enemy aircraft. His small formation of 4 Peak 51 Mustangs collectively contributed to the destruction of an astonishing 27 German aircraft on that pivotal day, all accomplished without incurring a single loss to his own flight. Such extraordinary figures would have been utterly unattainable and frankly unimaginable had conventional tactical approaches been employed. The 9th Air Force, which bore the critical responsibility for furnishing close tactical air support to ground forces, embraced this groundbreaking technique with even greater alacrity than its 8th Air Force counterpart. Its P-47 and P-38 units inherently operated at comparatively lower altitudes and possessed a more extensive background in executing ground attack missions. Consequently, when the innovative reverse pattern doctrine permeated down to the tactical fighter-bomber squadrons in the nascent days of June, pilots who had previously harbored considerable apprehension regarding airfield strikes unexpectedly began to actively volunteer for these hazardous assignments. The highly effective 362nd Fighter Group, for instance, conducted 31 reverse pattern attacks between June 6th and June 30th, successfully obliterating more than 200 German aircraft on various airfields scattered across the Norman landscape, all while sustaining the loss of a mere 4 P-47s to enemy ground fire. Crucial intelligence evaluations derived from highly classified ultra-intercepts, decoded German communications, unequivocally revealed that Luftwaffe units were frantically petitioning for enhanced airfield defenses and concurrently reporting profound morale issues plaguing their ground crews. These personnel felt utterly exposed and defenseless against the relentless onslaught of the innovative American tactical approaches. A particularly telling intercepted dispatch originating from Luftwaffe, 3 headquarters in mid-June, voiced a stark complaint. Enemy fighters now attacking from all vectors, defensive preparations insufficient, urgent need for mobile flak batteries. This communiqué underscored the severe disarray and vulnerability experienced by the German air arm. The Luftwaffe, therefore, possessed a precise understanding of the unfolding aerial catastrophe. Their predicament, however, was their abject inability to effectively counteract or halt the devastating impact. By the arrival of July 1944, the revolutionary reverse pattern strafing technique had been thoroughly integrated and established as standard operational doctrine throughout both the distinguished 8th and 9th Air Forces. Concurrently, existing training manuals underwent comprehensive revisions to incorporate the new methodology, while compelling gun camera footage capturing successful attacks was widely disseminated, serving as invaluable instructional material. Furthermore, newly assigned pilots arriving in the European theater of operations were rigorously instructed in this sophisticated technique even prior to embarking on their inaugural combat missions. What had initially emerged as a single colonel's insightful analytical solution to a pressing tactical dilemma had, in an astonishingly brief span of less than 2 months, become fully institutionalized and universally adopted across the entirety of the American fighter force deployed in Europe. It is crucial to note, however, that the Luftwaffe was certainly not passively observing while American fighters systematically decimated their vital airfields. German High Command swiftly acknowledged the profound and immediate threat posed by these new tactics, initiating the implementation of various countermeasures with the utmost speed that the prevailing wartime logistical capabilities would permit. The inherent challenge, however, was that virtually every proposed solution invariably collided with insurmountable constraints, chronic shortages of essential resources, intense temporal pressures, and the unyielding fundamental physics governing effective airfield defense. The American forces had, in essence, discovered a critical vulnerability, a mere fissure in the enemy's protective shell, which, upon closer examination, proved to be not just a superficial flaw, but a deep-seated structural defect within the very architecture of German aerial defense. The initial German countermeasure was precisely what one might anticipate given the circumstances, a directive to strategically reposition their anti-aircraft off-flak artillery pieces to more adequately safeguard Western approaches. Towards the end of May and into the early days of June 1944, Luftwaffe airfield defense units were issued explicit instructions to redistribute their formidable anti-aircraft weaponry, aiming for the establishment of more symmetrically balanced defensive perimeters. Substantial 37mm and 40mm caliber guns, which had previously been predominantly concentrated in the eastern sectors, were now mandated for relocation. The objective was to forge comprehensive, overlapping fields of fire that could engage threats from every conceivable compass direction. While this strategy appeared entirely logical and sound on paper, its practical execution rapidly devolved into an unmitigated logistical catastrophe. The arduous task of relocating a heavy flak emplacement bore no resemblance whatsoever to the comparatively simple repositioning of a machine gun nest. Each individual 3.7 cm Flak 43 gun, complete with its mounting apparatus, tipped the scales at a staggering weight exceeding 4,000 pounds. Its proper deployment necessitated either a robust concrete foundation or extensively reinforced earthworks, meticulously engineered to absorb and dissipate the immense recoil forces generated during firing. Furthermore, the intricate electrical targeting systems, secure ammunition storage bunkers, vital communications lines, and essential crew shelters all mandated complete reconstruction from their very foundations. German engineering units conservatively estimated that a period of 6 to 8 weeks would be required per position to adequately relocate and meticulously re-zero these formidable weapons systems. Crucially, the Luftwaffe simply did not possess the luxury of 6 weeks. The Allied invasion was already firmly underway, and American fighter aircraft were relentlessly attacking their airfields on a daily basis. In an attempt to mitigate the dire situation, some resourceful airfield commanders resorted to improvised, expedient solutions, deploying their heavy guns on provisional mounts that lacked the requisite stable foundations. However, these hastily constructed installations were plagued by severe and inherent limitations. Without the stability afforded by proper platforms, the accuracy of the anti-aircraft fire deteriorated markedly. The powerful recoil generated by rapid, sustained firing would invariably cause the entire gun position to shift, thereby critically disrupting the targeting alignment. Furthermore, operating crews frequently reported persistent jamming issues and various mechanical failures, directly attributable to the intense vibrations. Consequently, a flak gun hastily emplaced in this manner might manage to discharge a handful of bursts, but it was utterly incapable of delivering the precisely concentrated, highly accurate barrage that had historically rendered German airfield defenses so devastatingly effective. In a further attempt to counter the escalating threat, the Luftwaffe experimented with the deployment of mobile flak batteries. These consisted of 20mm anti-aircraft guns mounted on trucks, designed for rapid repositioning in direct response to the direction of incoming attacks. These mobile units began appearing in Allied reconnaissance photographs by mid-June, typically observed positioned on roads encircling airfield perimeters, from where they could swiftly redeploy to threatened sectors. However, American pilots demonstrated remarkable adaptability, devising effective countermeasures within a mere matter of days, rather than confining their assaults to single-direction attacks. Fighter flights commenced striking airfields from multiple vectors simultaneously. For example, a four-ship flight would strategically divide into two distinct elements, each attacking from diametrically opposite directions. This tactical maneuver compelled the mobile flak units to make an impossible choice: decide which aerial threat to engage, while the other element proceeded to strafe the airfield unmolested. The fundamental reality was that the mobile guns simply could not be in two places at once. In a desperate effort to fundamentally address the vulnerabilities, German engineers put forth a radical proposal to entirely redesign existing airfield layouts, envisioning circular dispersal patterns wherein defensive positions would command equivalent fields of fire in every conceivable direction. Luftwaffe headquarters, demonstrating a recognition of the severity of the problem, actually granted approval for this ambitious plan in July 1944. Furthermore, it allocated critical resources for the reconstruction of 6 principal airfields located in France, strictly adhering to these innovative new specifications. However, a mere 3 weeks subsequent to this authorization, all 6 of these crucial airfields had fallen into Allied hands, a direct consequence of the successful Normandy breakout. Consequently, these comprehensive defensive redesigns lamentably never progressed beyond the initial blueprint stage. The Luftwaffe also endeavored to employ various deception tactics in a bid to confuse and deter the relentless American aerial assaults. They meticulously constructed dummy flak positions strategically located along the western approaches to their airfields. These elaborate ruses involved sandbag emplacements artfully arranged with logs painted to convincingly resemble formidable gun barrels. Their objective was to induce American pilots to either consciously avoid these seemingly defended sectors, or at the very least, to expend valuable time and fuel evading non-existent threats. However, highly sensitive ultra-intercepts exposed this cunning strategy in the early days of July. In response, the 8th Fighter Command promptly issued clear directives, simply instructing its pilots to disregard any suspected dummy positions unless they observed unequivocal evidence of actual muzzle flashes. This elaborate deception, regrettably for the Germans, proved to be short-lived, enduring for less than 2 weeks before astute American pilots swiftly learned to discern the authentic from the fabricated. Perhaps the most profoundly revealing German response to the escalating crisis emerged in late July, a period when several beleaguered Luftwaffe fighter units made the drastic decision to simply abandon their forward airfields entirely. They commenced a strategic withdrawal, relocating to bases situated much deeper within the protective confines of Germany, where American fighter aircraft possessed significantly reduced loiter time for sustained strafing attacks. This particular maneuver transcended a mere tactical adjustment. It constituted an undeniable and stark admission of defeat. By embarking on this eastward retreat, the Luftwaffe effectively relinquished crucial operational flexibility and severely compromised its response time, thereby unequivocally ceding aerial superiority over the contested battlefield in a desperate bid to preserve its diminishing aircraft assets. Allied intelligence meticulously observed and documented this development, noting with particular interest that some German fighter groups were compelled to launch combat missions from airfields located over 200 miles from the active front lines, consuming precious fuel merely to traverse the vast distance required to reach the battle area. The journey to the battle area itself often presented a formidable challenge. But the fundamental obstacle lay in the inherent vulnerability of airfields. These critical installations are intrinsically defensive liabilities because of their immovable nature and vast physical presence, rendering any attempt at concealment futile. Furthermore, their operational requirements, such as predictable approach and departure patterns dictated by prevailing wind conditions and meteorological phenomena, make their activities easily anticipated. Once American forces definitively demonstrated the efficacy of attacking these sites from unconventional directions, thereby disrupting the standard flight patterns, there existed no immediate or effective countermeasure that did not necessitate a complete and arduous reconstruction of the entire defensive infrastructure from its very foundations. Such an undertaking was utterly beyond the capacity of the Luftwaffe, which was already stretched thin, lacking both the requisite time, the material and personnel resources, and the strategic respite needed to implement such a monumental change while simultaneously engaged in a devastating conflict across two expansive fronts. Remarkably, the pioneering reverse pattern strafing technique did not vanish into the annals of history with the conclusion of the Second World War. The ingenious tactical innovations spearheaded by Colonel Zemke and his intrepid pilots over German Luftwaffe airfields in 1944 transcended their immediate combat application, evolving into a foundational doctrine that continues to resonate profoundly throughout modern military aviation. The underlying, universally applicable principle to launch an assault from the direction least anticipated by the adversary, strategically exploiting their deeply ingrained operational assumptions and predictable behaviors, proved far more versatile than the specific tactical problem it initially addressed. Consequently, this brilliant case study has become an indispensable component of the curriculum taught at every major air warfare institutions across the globe, illustrating the enduring power of unconventional thinking. In the immediate aftermath of the global conflict, the nascent United States Air Force moved swiftly to formally integrate and codify these highly effective reverse pattern attacks into its official ground attack doctrine. A comprehensive 1949 manual, specifically tailored for fighter-bomber operations, dedicated an entire chapter to elucidating the strategic importance and practical methodologies of employing non-standard approach vectors for the suppression of enemy air defenses. This formalized instruction was, in essence, a bureaucratic encapsulation and expansion of Zemke's original groundbreaking concept. Pilots undergoing rigorous training for the impending Korean War were immersed in detailed studies of gun camera footage from the 1944 strafing runs, meticulously analyzing these historical examples to glean vital insights into survival tactics within heavily fortified and contested airspace. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The Korean War unequivocally validated the technique's enduring relevance, even amidst the dawn of the jet age. As F-80 Shooting Stars and F-84 Thunder jets commenced their sustained campaigns against North Korean and Chinese airfields in 1951, they encountered defensive networks strikingly similar in design and deployment to those previously utilized by the Luftwaffe, meticulously layered anti-aircraft gun emplacements, positioned primarily to thwart conventional standard approach patterns. American pilots, drawing upon an ingrained institutional memory and tactical acumen, applied reverse pattern tactics almost instinctively, launching assaults on these airfields from unexpected vectors that thoroughly disoriented and outmaneuvered defenders arrayed for more traditional attacks. The resultant loss rates for these critical airfield strikes in Korea were significantly lower than initial strategic projections, largely attributable to the seamless transfer and effective application of the tactical wisdom acquired in the European theater. This pronounced operational success did not go unnoticed by the Soviet Union. Following a meticulous analysis of American combat tactics employed during the Korean conflict, Soviet military aviation theorists embarked upon a comprehensive overhaul of their entire airfield defense doctrine. By the mid-1950s, newly promulgated Soviet air defense manuals unequivocally mandated the implementation of omnidirectional 360-degree coverage, featuring intricately overlapping fire zones. These directives specifically cited American variable vector attacks as the primary and most significant threat model their defenses needed to counter. When American reconnaissance aircraft subsequently conducted photographic missions over Soviet airfields in the late 1950s, the distinctive circular defensive layouts were immediately and unambiguously recognized as direct, tangible responses to the innovative principles Zemke had championed a mere 15 years prior. The protracted conflict in Vietnam heralded yet another significant evolution of this tactical philosophy. By the 1960s, advanced surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, had largely superseded conventional flak guns as the preeminent anti-air threat. Yet the fundamental strategic conundrum persisted. Defenders invariably positioned their formidable weaponry based on anticipated attack patterns. American Wild Weasel missions, comprising specialized aircraft designed specifically for the suppression of enemy air defenses, employed tactics that were a direct, sophisticated descendant of the original reverse pattern doctrine. Rather than adhering to the most logical or predictable ingress vectors towards their targets, Wild Weasel crews deliberately executed highly unpredictable and erratic flight paths. This calculated unpredictability compelled North Vietnamese missile operators into a constant state of repositioning and complex recalculation, thereby severely degrading the overall effectiveness and lethality of their integrated air defense systems. Today, cutting-edge stealth technology represents an even more advanced and subtle manifestation of this foundational concept. Contemporary aircraft, such as the formidable F-22 and F-35, are engineered with meticulously crafted radar cross-sections that exhibit dramatic variations depending on the viewing angle. The operational doctrine guiding the deployment of these exquisite platforms emphatically underscores the critical importance of attacking from axes where enemy radar coverage is inherently weakest or most compromised. This sophisticated approach is, in essence, a high-technology rendition of the original tactical brilliance, akin to striking Luftwaffe airfields from the less expected west instead of the heavily defended east. This enduring principle scales seamlessly across the entire spectrum of aerial engagements, from close-quarters, visual-range gunfights to complex, beyond visual-range, missile combat scenarios. The Israeli Air Force, renowned for its tactical ingenuity, meticulously studied these reverse pattern tactics and applied them with devastating efficacy during the pivotal 1967 Six-Day War. On June 5, 1967, Israeli fighter aircraft unleashed a series of devastating preemptive strikes, effectively annihilating the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. Crucially, their attack vector was not from the expected eastern frontier, but rather from over the Mediterranean Sea, approaching from the north and west. This brilliant maneuver exploited areas where Egyptian radar coverage was thinnest and ground defensive positions were lightest. Egyptian airfields, ironically, had been designed with their defenses heavily concentrated against a perceived threat emanating from the east, precisely where Israel was geographically situated. The Israelis, with surgical precision, exploited this deeply ingrained assumption, mirroring Zemke's exploitation of German assumptions 23 years earlier. Presently, the revered United States Air Force Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base continues to impart reverse pattern concepts as a fundamental element within its rigorous suppression of enemy air defenses (SEAD) curriculum. Students delve into historical case studies, meticulously analyzing events such as the Asher's Lean raid as a compelling example of tactical innovation forged under immense combat pressure. While the specific techniques have undeniably evolved, modern aircraft now leverage sophisticated electronic warfare suites, precision standoff weapons, and advanced network-centric coordination capabilities that were unimaginable in 1944. The immutable underlying principle remains steadfast. Identify your adversary's preconceived notions about how you will launch an attack, and then execute something entirely different. What truly elevates the reverse pattern narrative beyond mere operational success is the remarkable fact that a single officer, armed with nothing more than a calculator and reconnaissance photographs, astutely identified a critical vulnerability, rapidly conceived a brilliant solution, rigorously tested it under live combat conditions, and profoundly altered operational doctrine across an entire theater of war in an astonishingly brief period of less than 8 weeks. In an era where military bureaucracies are frequently criticized for their perceived inertia and slow adaptation, Zemke's audacious innovation stands as irrefutable proof that genuinely good ideas can disseminate and take root with incredible speed when human lives hang precariously in the balance. The Luftwaffe had painstakingly invested years in constructing airfield defenses optimized for a specific and predictable threat model. Zemke, in a matter of weeks, conclusively demonstrated the fallacy of that model, and the profound, far-reaching ripples from that singular insight are unequivocally still discernible in the strategic and tactical approaches modern air forces employ for ground attack missions 8 decades later.